That is true. There's a big difference. But turns out there are good reasons for that. One of the reasons is informational efficiency or information disclosure quality. There was a study by, actually, you know that guy, Mark Liu. Mark and one of his co-authors did a study. They sorted firms based on the degree of discretionary accruals. Okay, discretionary accruals are, in essence, the higher they are, the lower is the disclosure quality. Uh, and turns out firms with high disclosure quality, uh, if you followed momentum strategies among firms with high disclosure quality, you buy the winners, you sell the losers, you don't make any excess money. If you follow the same strategy among firms with low disclosure quality, you do. Turns out, momentum profits are essentially a byproduct of uh, information uncertainty. In a sense, since information uncertainty is there, you're taking a higher risk. That's where it comes from. And the way it kind of works, uh, an MBA student of mine years ago, this was after Mark published that paper, I told him, how about you actually look at this from corporate governance viewpoint? Those days in the MBA, you could write a thesis or you had to take a comprehensive exams. This guy was from Slovak Republic. He said, I'll do a thesis. Okay. He basically looked at, there are measures of corporate governance. So you could classify firms into democracies versus what you want to call dictatorships. Dictatorships do not have reason to hide bad information. Okay? Think about Facebook. Okay, Mark Zuckerberg is effectively the dictator of Facebook because his shares have more votes, even though he may own only 10% of the company. He controls more than 51% of voting votes. So if there's a bad information, he has no problem announcing that. But in democratic companies, especially in the management, they want to hide the bad information as much as possible and hype the good information as much as possible. Why? Because if I announce the bad information, stock price is going to go down. It makes it easier for the firm to be taken over. Then I'm going to lose my job. So you expect the information quality to be worse among democracies. So democracy is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to corporate governance, but you don't expect that in a dictatorship. In fact, he did this strategy. If he followed momentum strategies among dictatorships, he didn't make any money. If he followed the momentum strategies among democracies, he made significantly more money, even adjusting for some known risk factors, which we're going to talk about next week, the so-called Fama-French three-factor model and so on and so forth. So even some apparent violations of that are not necessarily violations, right? I'll give you one more example. There is a similar pattern among mutual funds. Instead of looking at the stocks, you're going to say, I'm going to buy the top 20% of the mutual funds that did the best last year, okay, versus, and I'm going to sell if I have anything in the bottom 20%. If you follow that strategy, buying the past winners is going to make you a lot more money. What's odd is that depends upon when you're making that decision. This turned out to be my PhD dissertation. The guy who did that study, Mark Carhart, he looked at the end of each December, he sorted the funds based on their performance. He bought the top 10%, he sold the bottom 10%. The winners did a lot better than what you want to call the losers. So and this was, he even allowed the momentum factor. This was even after accounting for the actual momentum strategy profitability. You're thinking, why are these guys making more money? Is there consistent uh, talent out there? And I looked at that, and we were taking a seminar in the second year of the PhD program. We had to write a paper. And just the year before, there was a paper published about the year-end behavior of certain mutual funds. Uh, One of the things you should know about mutual funds, a lot of the new money goes to the winners. People actually follow the winners. That means if I'm a mutual fund that is somewhat behind in the rankings, I have all sorts of incentives to take risks and maybe by chance to end up at the top and get more money. And oddly enough, these mutual fund investors do not penalize the bottom performers much. I mean, people are not active. They say, okay, I'm not going to do anything. This year they ended up being bad. Maybe next year they'll be better. So, as a fund that's relatively at the bottom, you have almost nothing to lose. If you take risk and lose more, you're not going to lose much money out of what you're managing. But if you get lucky, you will. On the other hand, if you're at the top, you have no incentive to take extra risks, so you put on the brakes. This means the end of December numbers are kind of uh, dirty, okay? But as soon as the year ends, they go back to their regular strategies. In time series analysis, there is something called inspector analysis masking filter. So what I did is, what if instead of doing these rankings at the end of January's, we did this at the end of June's? It shouldn't matter at all, right? If there is indeed consistent talent of the winners, you should be able to make the same amount of money. Turns out you don't. I even started with a funny example. I said, you have two identical twin brothers. I called one of them Hans, the other Franz. This kind of ages me. There was a shtick in Saturday Night Live called Pumping Up with Hans and Franz. Okay, and Kevin Nealon and Dana Carvey was doing it. And these guys are separated at birth. Hans stays in the United States. United States fiscal year ends, tax year ends at the end of December. And Franz goes to Australia. In Australia, tax year actually ends at the end of June. So Hans does his sorts at the end of December, and Franz does it at the end of June because of the tax issues. I started both of these guys with putting $3,000 a year every year. Okay, and I had data since 1963 to '03. They both invested for 40 years using exactly the same strategy, except the timing of orderings are different. Exact same strategy. By 2003, Hans ended up with $8 million in his 401k. Franz had only $3 million. Turns out, following the winners as of the Junes is not as profitable. That means all that stuff is coming from the year-end extra risk that these guys are taking. As soon as I even did it with limited data, my advisor or the professor of that class, he says, "This is your PhD dissertation." The rest, I just had to go through the motions. But simple idea. Even the apparent violations like that are actually not violations. It's not that easy to make money. If it was, a lot of it wouldn't have been that difficult to identify those people who can make those kinds of monies. And most of the funds would have gone there. Even though you as an individual investor may not be able to see it, we have all these advisors like Edward Jones and stuff like that. Of course, those guys have different incentives, but we'll get to that. Somebody should be able to identify these people. Since they haven't, it's like the question of, is there intelligent life out there other than us? Maybe there is. But if there was, at some point we would have gotten some radio signal from somewhere. We haven't gotten it yet. So until we do, we cannot say that these are violated, right? We'll continue on this on Wednesday. We're going to look at historical performance of certain strategies and how they are no longer available. I'll see you guys Wednesday.